Good evening, and welcome to the February 13, 2019 City of Lake Forest Plan Commission meeting. At first, I would like to have each commission member introduce themselves for all those in attendance.
Steve Douglas.
Ramo Piketty.
Monica Ruggles.
Rosemary Kerr.
Guy Berg.
Michael Freeman.
Susan Atkinson.
Our first order of business is consideration of the approval of the minutes of the January 9, 2019 Plan Commission meeting. Does anyone have any comments, corrections to offer on the minutes of the January 9, 2019 meeting?
Yeah.
Has everyone had time to review the minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is passed. First on our agenda is a public hearing and action for consideration of a request for approval of the tentative and final plat of re-subdivision and overall site plan for the second phase of the McKinley Road redevelopment. One lot and two outlots are proposed to accommodate the second condominium building located to the south of the condominium building recently constructed as phase one of the project. The second phase of the development is proposed on the property currently addressed as 711 McKinley Road and a portion of the property currently addressed as 697 McKinley Road. I'd first like to ask any commission members if they have a declaration of conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts. Okay. Next, I would like to swear in all parties intending to testify, either giving a presentation or willing to speak on the issue, either in support or in opposition. Please state your name.
Peter Whitmer.
Do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you're about to give or have previously given is true and correct to your best knowledge?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Whitmer, we have 3 new commission members since we started talking about the first building in 2016, and it would probably be to the benefit of all commission members if you would please review something of the overall plan and how it came to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity to present phase 2 of this project in front of you tonight. I'm Peter Whitmer, the architect for the project and also a partner in the development company of the project. We started this, we actually started probably acquiring the property, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, and was successful in, I think there was 2 buildings on the phase 1 piece, and then the 7-Eleven building we were able to purchase, and then really in the last year I've been able to negotiate with a church and really come to an agreement with the house parcel. So, and I think when we were here in the Plan Commission the first time, we had assembled all the parcels, but we did not have the house on the church, and so that limited. There was a lot of discussion about that, and we felt it was in the best interest of not only the development but the overall planning to try to incorporate that. And fortunately, we were able to come to an agreement with that and acquire that part of that property. So 30 feet of, it's a 50 foot wide lot, and 30 feet of that is incorporated into the parcel. We looked at probably 7 or 8 different kinds of schemes in terms of how the site circulation worked in various, we probably had 3 meetings, I think 3 or 4 meetings with the Planning Commission, and how it would divide up and how the phases would be in the open space and the relationship of the property to the library and the property to the east that the city owned. We came back with the phasing in the buildings that we have currently. It's worked out very well, and I think now that you can see the first building up, we've always thought that it made sense to have a one-way drive that comes through the center of the development with parallel parking on the north side of it, and then turn the corner and have two-way traffic through the north-south street. The existing building's garage is entered on the east end of it. The Phase 2 building, which we had previously said that we would have the ramp down into the garage and underground parking underneath the entire building, which is on the east of this too. So the site circulation was set and the building faces were set. We talked a lot about the facades of the buildings and what they look like, in the thought process of the massing and being somewhat of a background buildings to the church and to the library and to Market Square itself. And I think we've accomplished that quite well. The other thing that we talked about was the size and scale of the second building, that it would be shorter and smaller, and that we would it would mask the elevation on the south side of the first building that we did. I think in the overall development of the design, having it be the west elevations of the buildings be the same makes a lot of sense in terms of them being two pieces together. And then the nice thing about this is that when it turns to the south elevation, then allows us to tier the thing back and really have these terraces that move back and make the south west corner of this, which is a pretty prominent piece to it, really look like two fronts to the building. So this is the overall site plan. The plat of survey, plat of subdivision that we have, this just indicates the parcel that we discussed about. The outlot A which is the parcel that remains with the church. And then outlot B is the piece that is the library retains for their expansion, future expansion. I thought this was helpful in just sort of locating the building physically on the site. The spacing between the building and the road is the same as what our existing building is, so there'll be a sidewalk not only on the north side but also on the south side of the building, and then the distance from the face of the curb to the building is the same distance as what we have on the current building. You can see here the outline of the existing house. Basically, we come to the north face of the house is really where our building ends, and you can see, the depth of the building there. It has 5-foot setbacks on the round, and I think we respect that in all the setbacks. Really, on the south side, we have 19 feet to the building face, and then we have 16 feet. And then where our stair tower is in the corner here, it gets a little bit tight where it's 6 feet, and then we're back to 13 feet along the south edge. And then on the back corner, we have 33 feet from the new outlot to the back piece. Just as the first building, the terraces that are outside, these are single-family residents, so are important for those first-floor units, so that we've really developed areas outside that are, so the front terraces will be important to those units, and then we have a screened porch that goes along the south elevation, a terrace in the southeast corner, and then another screened porch and terrace that comes in the northeast corner for that. This is just a bird's eye view looking at it from the south, looking actually northeast. This is our project that we're looking at, and then this is the existing building to give you an idea of how they fit in there sort of three-dimensionally. And then this is looking back at the east elevation. So this is the existing building that's here currently, and then this was our proposed building here on our phase 2. You can see here the ramp that goes down underneath to the parking. There are 6 units in the building we're proposing, and I think we have 17 parking spaces in the lower level for the parking, and then the shared parking will be along the perpendicular to the street, parallel parking along here, and then there's a couple service spaces down in this northeast corner for additional parking there. The pedestrian access through the site, so there's people can walk through through the street system, and then also walk through to the library through a sidewalk that connects this up to that. We talked a lot about the pedestrian access of the overall project and having it pedestrian friendly, and I think our sidewalk system allows for that, so that people can walk through this through the community. This is just a picture of the first building, and then this will be the 2 buildings together. And then this is looking west, so that's the train station here. Basically, all our detailing is really mirrored on the existing building. It's sort of a kit of parts that we put together to fit the configuration of the site on the phase 2. And then this is our west elevation. And that's a pretty quick summary of the project. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over and answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Kathy?
Thank you, Chairman Karen, members of the commission. This project has been under discussion for a number of years. In 2014 and 2015, the City Council appointed an ad hoc committee, the Cultural Corridor Committee, to look at the area on the east side of McKinley Road between Westminster and Deer Path. The city knew that the Historical Society was looking for another location, so knew that city property would be in play. We acknowledged that the office buildings, the 3 office buildings that were located on the east side of McKinley were something less than Class A office space. And as the ad hoc group talked about it, they really talked about the importance of bringing residential development back adjacent to the central business district. They acknowledged that we had, through the years, lost rental units that used to be above virtually all the buildings along Western Avenue, and those over time have been converted to office. So at the conclusion of the ad hoc group's discussion, with the benefit of some input from a central business district task force and some consultants, the broad conclusion was that the area east of McKinley Road should transition to residential development, multifamily residential development over time, and that office uses should really be encouraged on the west side of the railroad tracks, to locate them next to restaurants or coffee shops or retail stores to really build that commercial area. So this project is really the result of that vision. So in 2016, the Plan Commission held a number of meetings, began to consider the master plan, and talked, as Mr. Whitmer said, about a number of different approaches to this property. The city, in its discussions of this property, requested that an open space be provided on the north side of the library, which you see in the plan today, and that the library be given some additional property. The library had been using the rear of the Historical Society building for some unofficial overflow parking, and wanted to make sure that we could at least provide some additional land, whether that'll be used for parking or whether as the library looks to its future, there's some other use for that property or some other redevelopment of the library. We don't know yet, but at least that squares off that library property. So with the council's approval of the overall master plan for the area, it was acknowledged, again, there'd be open space, there'd be a transfer of some property to the library, that there would be pedestrian connections to and through the development, and that the development would happen in phases, so that the developer and the city would have time to assess what types of units are needed, what was happening with the other new development, the redevelopment at Laurel and Western Avenue, and to assure that we weren't bringing too much of a product online at one time. So this is an unusual project in that you can actually look and see a real-life model of the building that is proposed. The first building went through a number of reviews by the Building Review Board. The Building Review Board appointed a subcommittee, did some work directly with the developer, and at the end of the day, that first building was approved, and again, you now see it in real life. So this piece is before you for your official action that is requested is approval of a plat of subdivision. A plat of subdivision is required because a portion of this property is being dedicated to the library, and now with the church property in part being a component of this development, a subdivision plat is needed to identify Lot 1, which is the area on which the improvements will be constructed, the building itself, the ramp to the underground garage, the open space, and the outdoor patios, and then the outlots, one for the library, one outlot A, which will be retained by the church. And as Mr. Whitmer said, it's the southern 20 feet of the existing lot on which the house is constructed. So what is before you is the plat of subdivision. This project was before the Building Review Board last week. Given that what is proposed is a building that essentially replicates the architectural details, the exterior materials of the first building with some change in massing. With the schedule, we did determine that moving that forward to the Building Review Board was appropriate in advance of your discussion because the overall master plan had already been approved by the City Council. So this was essentially a piece of a previously approved plan. If we were starting from the beginning, as we were before Phase 1, the matter would have come before you first and then be forwarded to the Building Review Board. So it's really a matter of where we are in the overall development process. And recently you've had a number of projects that are kind of evolving. For instance, you saw the plat of condominium for the first condominium building at the Kelmscott Park development. That came after much consideration of the overall development. So many of these developments have many sequential actions that need to be taken. With that, I think I will turn it back to you for questions. But what is the official action requested from you tonight is a recommendation on the plat of re-subdivision that's before you this evening.
Thank you. And now we'll have questions and requests for clarification from the commissioners to the petitioner or staff. And we'll start with Commissioner Athenson.
Oh, okay. So Peter, I wasn't here, obviously, the last go-around, so I'm just trying to play catch-up here a little bit. So can you, just so I understand, so Lot 1 is what the building's on, correct? Then Outlot A is now the church's property. Is that correct?
Correct.
And do we know what that's going to become?
That'll be open area for the church.
Okay, so open space on that one, okay. And then Outlet B is being donated back to the library,
Correct.
and that's for their expansion or parking.
Correct.
Okay, and then for, just to understand the whole master plan here, so Phase 3 and Phase 4, those parcels are owned by the city,
Correct.
right? Okay, so those are city lots, okay. So in part of this master plan, there's a plan for a third development that's going to go on Phase 3. But if that's city property, how does that work?
There's an agreement for basically what we did was, for the open space, have swapped so that this development will own the open space for the Phase 3, so that we'll put another building on that property, a next phase.
And that's in exchange for that little outlet to the library?
For the open space in the library space, correct?
Just to clarify, there is a purchase sale agreement in place to memorialize the fact that the city council has agreed to sell that portion. And we really consider that whole property there on the east side part of Phase 3. We don't know, we know it'll be residential. In earlier discussions about the master plan, it was acknowledged that that really needs to be a transition piece as you move from the bigger, taller buildings that front on McKinley Road to the single-family homes. But when that piece comes forward, that will be a bigger discussion among the plan commissioners, and that is something that certainly will come before the commission first, before that would go to the Building Review Board, because it is less clear at this point exactly what unit types those would be, what the building forms would be, and what the scale of the buildings will be.
But the city is committed already to selling that piece?
Yes.
So they can't decide to keep that open land?
No, there is a purchase sale agreement that has been signed and approved by the city council.
With
So
Peter?
that is acknowledged as part of the master plan to be a later phase of this overall development for residential development.
And then Phase 4, is that the open space? Because you keep saying open space, but I'm not too sure I know where the open space is on here.
The open space is located to the east of the building that's now before you, the Phase 2 building.
Right above the outlet?
Correct.
The outlet?
Correct.
So that little space right there. Okay, so then Phase 4, you're planning on selling for redevelopment?
I thought we've talked about three
Three
phases.
phases.
Yes.
Really, this is all one phase.
Correct.
Oh, so Phase 3 and 4 are together for redevelopment?
Whether it happened in two
phases.
additional phases, but that is a third component of the development that has not yet been detailed. There isn't a specific plan. We do know that it will be residential development.
Okay, I'm just trying
That's
to
what the
catch up.
master plan designates it for.
Because I remember when I was on HPC and Historical Society building was approved for demo. I wasn't at that meeting. But there was talk that Phase 4, that lot, would have been a single-family residence. And that's what the plan was at the time. So has that changed?
The original master plan did not include that northern half of the city property. And at that time, the zoning on the property allows it to be a single family or a duplex. But the council later realized that leaving that as almost an outlier really didn't make much sense. So whether part of that's open space, whether it ends up being single family, duplex, part of some other multifamily development, that is yet to be decided. We don't have a specific plan for Phase 3 or Phase 3-4.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand what the whole master plan looks like now, because it's changed a little bit. Okay. So in terms of the setbacks here, it seems, what are the setbacks on this property? Because I know in other residential neighborhoods, it's 25 feet. Is that the same here?
No.
This seems really close to
The
the lot lines here.
5 feet for side yards, and then it's 25 feet for front yard setback.
Okay,
Yeah.
is that unusual?
In this zoning, no, that's what this zoning is.
5 feet side set? Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Let's see, I've got some questions. So you've already had this building approved by the Building Review Board, correct?
Correct, yes.
And they approved the fourth level of outdoor patio then?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see.
Is what we have on the first building.
With the other one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. You know, I'm gonna think of some other questions, so maybe you wanna go to another commissioner right now? Yeah, thanks.
Sure.
Thanks, Pete.
Commissioner Ruggles?
Kathy, could I just clarify some information about the church property then?
Sure.
So Outlot A was part of the original lot that had the house on it.
Outlot A, and could you please put up the, so the lot owned by the church on which the single-family home is located is 50 feet wide, and it is in that configuration. That lot is still owned by the church today. There is a contract in place for the sale of that lot. And through those discussions, it was determined that the church, that the development only needed 30 feet to achieve its desired massing of the building. The church desired to keep 20 feet of that property, whether it's for expansion of the parking lot, whether it's for landscape buffering, whether the church decides to build something else someday north of the church building. That will simply be, that 20 feet will be added to the church property, and it will be available to the church to do with what they want.
Okay, yeah, so that was going to be one of my other questions. That church lot 689, it's a buildable lot then that the church could use in the future or sell it to somebody else and create a structure on that property, correct?
The Outlot A, as it stands alone, a 20-foot wide lot, would not be a separate buildable lot. It will be combined with the church property, but the church certainly has enough property that they could in the future subdivide off the northern portion of their property if they chose to.
Okay. So my question is also a little bit about this open space and the trade-off between the land that the city of Lake Forest is selling, you know, which is like, you know, the eastern portion. So my impression is that, so City of Lake Forest is sold the eastern portion in exchange for some open space in this development. So we end up with a relatively small park to the east of the proposed building, and then some land that's donated to the library. Is that correct?
That's correct, and obviously there's a monetary exchange as well.
Oh, okay.
The intent was not to create a park. This isn't intended to be a city park. It's simply a landscaped area to really provide an opportunity for the library in the future to perhaps establish more of a better articulated north elevation, or perhaps to provide some improved pedestrian access to the library. So it wasn't intended to be a park, but more of a landscaped relief area.
And Kathy, if I could add to that, because I was around, somewhat implicated in the plan, we expressed concern early on with their proposals, because I think they came to us with sort of thumbnail sketch ideas, and they were looking for feedback, if I think I remember correctly. And most of the people on the commission expressed concern that we try to avoid putting a multi-story building right behind the library so that it would feel like it was being crowded. And I think that was, I think, the direction that we expressed to them. And I think that sort of set a mechanism in going for perhaps some kind of a arrangement with the city where, okay, we won't build on all our property, we won't develop it to its full economic extent, and offer that as good gesture, and then there would be an arrangement made, I think, on a purchase for the city property. And so I think that, while you might say, well, doesn't seem to be very big open space, and how is it accessed? I don't think that was the intent, that it would be a city park, as much as that we didn't want to crowd the rear elevation of the library. You know, it's an interesting building, the library, because we have, of course, the front entrance that we all use. But you can walk through the library, and potentially you could put another entrance on the back someday. I mean, that's where we go to drop our books off that we don't want at home anymore. But the thought was that originally, when the cultural corridor was being kicked around, is that perhaps there might be even a public square with a new entry on the back. And so there were a lot of things that were being stirred, and I think the developer was trying to be sensitive to those, so they did not build right behind the library. It's basically, I think, what it boils down to. Would it be neater if the library and the developer turned that into a bigger park and so on and so forth? But I don't know that that's, you know, what we can do at this point. But that's my summary, my best memory. Does that make sense to you, Kathy? Does that ring a bell? I think that was where we. And I think, and I'll just keep on talking for a second, that maybe, I think if I remember correctly, it was our recommendation, some of our ideas is that maybe these other lots on the eastern border could be stepping down somewhat in scale to help, to be better sensitive to the single-family homes directly to the east.
I think our direction was that they should be.
Yes.
Yeah,
Should be. That was part of the master plan.
yeah.
Commissioner Ruggles.
That's it for now.
Commissioner Piketty.
No questions at this time, thank you.
Commissioner Freeman.
Thank you. Hey, Peter, I just have a couple of questions about our last discussion on this. So if I look at, the one that seems to make the most sense to me is L 7.2. So what we did discuss, and there was concern, I recall, about the size of the open space when we were constructing the master plan. And the reason I remember is I remember specifically talking about when the city looked at this issue with the library and with the developer, that they consider making those 8 parking spaces, which is roughly that additional space, land banked, and that there be some consideration to that being green space in addition to the open space, until such time as the library determined that there was in fact a need for those parking spaces. Because I think you can still navigate through there quite cleanly if that were lawn attached to the open space or it's 8 parking spaces.
Correct.
All right. But right now, the way it's designed though, there's a 6-foot wood fence that would run all the way around the perimeter of the parking area, the building itself and the parking area. And I could understand why, from the residents' point of view, that a 6-foot wood fence makes sense, because it shields the view of the back of the library. But my memory of the master plan was, and the task force that the city set up to look at this, was to make this, in fact, a corridor. I mean, they called it the cultural corridor, and there was supposed to be flow. And to me, that flow, and I remember our discussion quite clearly, was not just pedestrian flow, although that's very important, I think, to the objectives. But you gave a really good description of the visual flows. So when I look at your 3D diagram, here the property is, first of all, a great use of the property and a great partnership between the city and the neighbors and the developer. But I'm worried about, and you've got these 2 really unique structures. You've got the beautiful now historical train station, and there's a corridor view through to that. You've got the rotunda at the library, and so these residents are going to benefit from these wonderful historical properties and views. And I'm just concerned that, you know, we're gonna throw up a wood fence around what could be a more open space, a more inviting corridor. And, you know, are we gonna rush to pave over that area and make it 8 parking spaces with a big wood fence? That's not what I signed off on when I was thinking of the master plan. You know, I worry about those sightlines, and I don't know if that was discussed at all with the library. Are they still open to land banking? Where are we at on that?
I can tell you that the library would like those parking spaces tomorrow. They do believe they have a parking issue, but the library is going through its own contemplation of some possible changes. So we can certainly raise that discussion and perhaps pause and think about it. But I do know that the library misses the spaces that they used to use behind the Historical Society. And on most days, they feel that with their increased programming, that their parking is overflowing.
Yeah, I guess, my thought there is there not a way that we could create a pedestrian corridor from the newly remodeled and improved and increased parking spaces that are right there across McKinley, and really do what the task force set out to do, which is to create a corridor here, maybe perhaps more than one of them, Kathy, because 8 parking spaces is not going to solve some event that the library has. And perhaps I'm, you know, maybe because I live with 4 millennials, my kids, I mean, that's what I go to the library for, are the larger events. And if I have to park across the street, then that's what happens, because it's a special event. I get all my books from the library through ebooks and my Kindle app, and it's a fantastic service. But it does keep me out of the library. I'm not in there with the frequency I would have been, you know, maybe 20 years ago. But I just don't think 8 parking spaces does that. And I worry that we set up the task force, the city council had the foresight to do that, and yet we're gonna, for the sake of, you know, 8 spaces of asphalt, we're giving up a real opportunity, and that was the opportunity that I saw when we approved it. So the other thing I guess I'll save that for my comment section, but what was the other question I had for you? I think those are my questions. I think it's obvious I probably have a few other comments. So I'll pass.
I can pick up on some more, because I'm really intrigued by this whole concept of the cultural corridor. So maybe I'm missing something here, but, because I'm reading what, the redevelopment recommendations, and buildings should not exceed 3 stories, consider a mix of 2-story, 2.5-story, take advantage of view corridors. So I think I don't know, it just seems like the density is really tight here right now. These buildings are higher than they were supposed to be, according to the master plan. And now we're talking about taking away some more open space. This is really minimal open space here. And if you're developing phase 3 and 4, you're really landlocking the library and getting rid of that visual corridor and placing a burden on the neighbors next door with privacy and crowding and traffic. So I guess I'm just wondering, how did we go from developing a cultural corridor from possibly Westminster all the way down to Gorton to this? Because this doesn't seem to be meeting that criteria of a cultural corridor and also the redevelopment recommendations that are in this document that I read. I'm just trying to understand what happened here, because it seems like we've kind of gotten away from the master planning here.
The master plan that was approved by the city council is included in your packet, and it does identify the limits of the open space, and it does identify parking for the library, which some of you may remember there were representatives from the library who were present throughout that discussion. Certainly, we can pause and think through whether that parking for the library is needed, whether there's an opportunity to keep that as open space. My guess is that the developer would probably welcome that opportunity. But the overall master plan, as approved by the city council, is very consistent with how this area is evolving. Certainly, the concept of transitioning to lower buildings as you move east was absolutely a direction of the commission, and we're simply not there yet.
Could I add on to, this discussion a little bit? When I look at the original plan that was approved, what's being called out now as Phase 4 was basically open space. We thought that that was going to perhaps be a single-family residence. So I think when it was initially passed, we all had the feeling, okay, there's going to be this more open space to the north of the property. And looking at, what's before us now, we're sort of it's implied that Phase 3 and 4 are going to be one piece. It's probably not going to be a one-story or a single-family residence on the north side. So I think I have some concerns that this is going to be another big stretch of apartment buildings, which is fine, but it's just something that's different from what we originally spoke about. The other thing that, when I look at, this Phase 2, the building in footprint is bigger than the original master plan. Since they got the church property, now it's bigger. It just looks to me like it's a little bit more crowded on the site than, I guess, what I was expecting, and the open space seems small and not part of the whole cultural corridor that we were thinking. So I guess one of my questions would be, if the property to the east is eventually going to be part of this development, is it worth looking at taking a section of the southern part of that property and making that library parking, and then making the open space park that we have now a little bit bigger and having that connectivity to the library? Just so, since there is all this room to the east, maybe you move the development to the north more, and then just get some more open space in general for the whole development.
And what lot are we talking about here, Monica?
Phase 3,
But that's not what we're talking about tonight.
but it could be part of the master
Okay,
plan.
I understand, okay.
It would seem it's better to discuss these options now.
Sure, I agree. I'd like to pave and park and just make this like Versailles, but, I have to be careful, with all those ideas. I will say that I kind of like the width of the second building having become wider, because I think it balances out their ensemble, I have to say, and the turning of the corner with those reduced massings is kind of a nice trick, because from the diagonal, it looks like a building isn't as deep. So you actually make it look better. So, and those aren't architectural things, those are planning, the building, building design, surface of land design, I think that works.
I'm going to ask, before we get into a discussion among commission members, that each commissioner have the opportunity to address staff and petitioner with their particular questions. It will give us more information as we begin our long discussion. Okay? Commissioner Douglas.
So I think Kathy may have already answered my two questions by pointing out that the master plan was in our packet, and I see that's the last page in the packet. My first question was going to be, did the master, because I wasn't around for Phase 1, did the master plan contemplate the parcel that was acquired by the church? And now I see the answer is no. So then my second question was going to be, why wasn't this brought back to the Plan Commission at the point that the actual plan deviated from the master plan, the approved master plan? Because it does, granted, maybe there are advantages to that added width of the second building, but it certainly changed the whole massing of the Phase 2 scheme.
And actually, during the discussion of the master plan, the commission, I'm pretty certain, and certainly the council, urged that there be discussions with the church. There was concern that that adjacency, a three-story building adjacent to the house really wasn't a good long-term plan, and concerned that once that condominium building was built, even if it was 2 stories, the options for the church with that single-family home would be limited. So there was concern that at least there be discussions, and those discussions were lengthy, and we looked at various options. So a master plan doesn't dictate footprint, and in the discussion of the master plan, there was that specific direction, and in fact, some involvement, strong involvement from a couple of aldermen to really encourage those discussions to occur. So it seemed consistent with the discussions that led to the approval of the master plan.
Okay. The rest of my questions have already been asked and answered. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Berg?
Well, one thing that I've noticed about the building that's built, and I noticed this from across the street, from Market Square, from Western Avenue, when I look at it, because of that distance, I think it's okay for me to comment on this, because I see the building on the roof, the penthouse, and particularly the way the roof is sloping to drain, but it's sloping to drain so you see the angle, going north and south, and I saw that, and my heart kind of sank, and I thought, well, it would be better if it had been sloped to pitch the other way. And then I see on this building it's going to be the same situation, and I don't know why. Maybe it's just my eye, but that's sensitized to right angles or something. I don't know, but it gives me the immediate impression that something is sagging, to the lay person. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that, but for me, that's kind of an architecture in the urban context or the town context, and I'm just wondering if there's a way you can give that some thought. Go across the street, because these things that we see, and I love your model because it gives us kind of this 20,000 foot look, and also from across the street, which is how these buildings work in the town planning context. I'd like to see that addressed if that's possible. When you get away from the building, you see those penthouses and so forth. And all the other questions have been brought up and answered and discussed.
Do any commissioners have additional questions at this time? And I will say, we can open up discussion later on as well.
So Kathy, just to make sure I understand, so the library has not finalized any expansion plans at this point. And, I know they're working on them, but, how, because I'm looking at the master plan saying this is a bigger open space, a bigger parcel we were gonna give to the library. So with this new space, is that going to impact their planning process for expansion? Now that it's a smaller, it's just 8 parking lots, right? Like 8 parking spaces, right? Because I'm looking on this part and it looks like it's much bigger on the master plan. Do they know that they're getting a smaller spot than what was on the master plan?
Conceptually, I think what's presented in this plan is very consistent with what was discussed. Again, we can certainly pause. We don't have to asphalt in those parking spaces. We can pause. We can think about that in the context of a future phase. But more importantly, we can talk with the library, because you're right. They're in very, very early stages about thinking about the site and thinking about it in the context of the work that the building needs. Obviously, the dome is shrink wrapped, and that's a big investment, so there's a lot of thought going on, and so we can certainly pause on that piece and consider your comments of really thinking about, is there perhaps a more contiguous open space that can be more inviting to that back portion of the library? The other possibility is that those parking spaces go in as temporary until the library moves forward with some plans, and until the phase 3 is brought forward, to see if there's some other opportunity there to incorporate some parking.
Yeah, I think it's really important to include the library in these discussions, because if they're going down the path of spending $14 million on some kind of expansion, you want to make sure that this areas being redeveloped, so their plans, they don't spend money needlessly on something that can't happen.
And we're working very closely with the library, city staff is.
Were they notified of this meeting tonight? Yeah. It was addressed in 2016, and there really was minimal input from the library at that time.
They might not have been.
No,
they-
Ms.
they
Lemmer
came.
was there.
They came.
I raised it a number of times.
Oh, okay.
We actually had quite a bit of discussion with the library
Yes.
during the earlier discussion, and I know the developer did as well.
Okay, good.
So they were quite engaged in the discussion.
Okay.
Well, then I have some questions, and Mr. Whitmer, I have great respect for your work and your understanding of Lake Forest. I must say I was very surprised by seeing a short two-page request with very little factual information. So I do have a number of questions, some of which I hoped other commissioners might cover, so here we go. You've given the lot square footage, but we don't have the square footage of the proposed building, and what size it is in relation to the square footage of the existing building. That would be helpful to have. I think some of this may be information you're going to need to present at a later date. The linear feet of the length of the front facade of the new building, proposed building, versus the existing building, and I would agree, it does seem more appropriate to have it a bit wider there. There's no building layout for the 6 units. We did receive that for the first building, 723, 727. It showed where the parking spaces were, storage spaces, ingress, egress. You're indicating a different entranceway with a two-sided elevator. There's no rendering of that. And I was surprised that we did not receive that. I'm also surprised that it's 6 units, ranging in size from 8,000 square foot structure unit to 1,800 square feet. That's quite a size unit, and I understand you may have a number of letters of intent from your clients. I would be concerned about resale on that, and whether, as we deal in retail, and we talked about with the Chase Bank, and I know Steve Douglas was very involved in that, and Building Review had, I think, at least 2 presentations to make sure that the Chase Bank building fit in with the existing structures. I don't see any of that here. I think that we really have to question if the 8,000 square foot unit can, in the future, be made into smaller units. I'm not asking that they do, but is there plumbing in line, things like that? Because we may or may not have a replacement purchaser. This is a condominium?
Correct.
Yes, okay. An aerial photograph of the block, including the church, would have been helpful, as I think you've heard from the comments expressed by the commissioners. We discussed setbacks. The width of the, well, before I move off the 6 units, I don't have the denominator, the square footage of the entire building, so I have no idea how much control that 8,000 square foot unit owner has over the entire condo association. They alone may control it, for good or ill. And I consider that a legal question that should be resolved, and perhaps our city attorney should ask that too. We've run into something in the last year where years ago something was improved that created a liability issue for the city, and I want to make sure that is covered as well. The width of the private road, now you have to keep in mind this presentation is during a very snowy month, but it is a narrow road, and it will be more narrow once the parking spaces that are approved are put in. So that section of private road, I presume, will be plowed by an entity.
Correct.
Would it be, well, that gets to another question I'll have in a minute, but, and then the city would be plowing the public alley. Is that correct?
No, that's not my understanding. That we would contract to have snow plowing on the entire alley and the private road.
And that gets to my next question. With the second building and potentially a third, you're setting each building up as a separate condominium.
Correct.
Will there be an HOA The homeowners association, who will contract for one landscaping group, one snow plowing group, et cetera?
There'll be an overall association for all the phases to contract that not only will cover the maintenance of the joint road and also for the snow plowing. And then each HOA of each building will have their own separate one for their landscaping and their building maintenance for each individual building.
Which raises my question again about the control the 8,000 square foot unit owner might have over that building. But it's hard to say since I don't have the square footage of the building.
Well, can you answer that question?
Sure. Yeah.
Would that be helpful?
You want me to, I can respond to
It
all
would be
those.
helpful, but.
Yeah, sure. The building footprint is 9,000 square feet. I apologize for
9,000 square feet?
9,000 square feet. Yeah, with the
Per floor, is that
with the per floor for the outside
Oh,
envelope,
okay.
which has it. I can go through here. I had just maybe we should step back a little bit and talk about how we developed these buildings and how the first ones came about. They're basically developed as white boxes so that each individual buyer can customize their design of their unit. We have 11 units, or there's 13 units in the first building, 2 affordables and 11 units. And so each individual buyer can lay out whatever they want to do. We design it custom, and and we follow through with that. We've completely sold the first building, and it's about 80% occupied. The second building is the same configuration in terms of the layout of the units is just a white box, and then they lay out with inside of that completely, bedrooms, all that, when they purchase the white box. So the top floor is 1 unit. It's approximately 8,000 square feet. It has ability to be, it could be subdivided into 2 units. It has a center elevator with 2 sides. Here, I can show you this is the first floor layout. This is the entrance. So you come into the entrance here, you come in the elevator here. This would be 1 unit. We have this into 3 units. And so that would be the 3 units on the first floor. The second floor, you come into a central elevator. From the elevator, you go directly into the units. This has been a very positive selling feature for the units so that you don't have a lobby space. This is 1 unit, and then this is the other unit on the second floor. And so the third floor is 1 unit that you come in. The whole floor takes up that unit. It could be re-subdivided into the elevator, and the access and the egress would work to have 2 separate units in that floor too.
So on the top floor, you have 1 entrance. How would you subdivide that unit if you have only the 1 entrance?
It has a double-sided elevator, so we'll have 2 doors on both sides, so you come in one side and one on the other side.
So you could have at the most 2 units.
Correct. That's like all the other floors. That's like our other building to the same configuration.
Well, I think it would have been very helpful to have this in the packet, and we're just getting a cursory look at it now.
I understand. The width of the building is identical to the building that we currently have up. So that is exactly what you see there on the site plan. Let's see. Go back. Yeah, so it is exactly the width of the current building. So they're identical in the overall width.
It looks a bit, it
And-
looks in proportion, but not quite identical in the materials we have. Perhaps that's just a different visual.
Yeah, here's the overall bird's eye. You can see the relationship of the 2 buildings there.
And
And the existing building that we built is right around 16,000 square foot footprint for that.
723, 727 is 16,000 square foot per floor, are you
Per
saying?
floor, correct.
floor,
Yeah, per floor. Yes, correct.
Referring to Commissioner Ruggles' comments, I too see the dimensions of the open space to be different from the original approval. Seems to be a small square as opposed to a longer rectangle, and I would like to know the dimensions of what we saw at the Plan Commission and what is contained in our packet tonight. Also, and I'm surprised I'm raising this question since I'm not the architect, but you have a 3-story building and a small square of open space. How much sunlight is that open space going to receive from this building? Because that, I get a fair amount, I have that same exposure, and by noontime, there's very little sun left. And also, if you're contemplating even a 2-story building in what's listed as Phase 4, then that too is going to shade that open space for a portion of the day. So generally, people like to sit in sunlight, and I know we did discuss that in our initial proposal, and I would like to see a study of just how much sunlight this open space we all want is going to receive.
We're happy to do sun studies. We have this all modeled in 3D, and we can show how the sun moves for there. The space between the buildings, we're very comfortable with. That's the same as Regents Row in terms of the light between those two buildings. So, you know, we can.
Regents Row has different exposures.
It's the same east-west.
The open space that we're contemplating here is between two buildings that are running east and west.
Correct.
Regents Row runs north and south.
No, it's east and west too.
Is it really?
Yes.
I think it's east and west, too.
It actually, Regents Row is longer. There's two buildings that are basically longer than these two buildings, so that the open space here is really quite a bit more light gets into this than Regents Row. So, you know, we're comfortable
Here
with
again,
that.
if this had been included in the packet of information, it wouldn't be an issue. But the fact that it hadn't even been addressed was a concern to me. And I would still like to see that. Also, the parking access is adjacent to the open space. Are you having a protective fence there?
We're planning on having landscape dense enough that it acts as a railing for that, so that it won't be access.
My only
for the
concern is you may have children coming over from the library.
And we could look at, if we think we need to have a fence along that, we could have a railing and fence. I would agree with the comments of not having a fence between the library open space and.
No, I'm talking about where you have the descending
Yeah,
entryway.
I understand that.
Okay.
Yes, I understand that.
You have a drawing of that, don't you? Bird's eye one.
It looked like there might be one, but
It's hedge on either side, as I recall.
Yeah, I mean, there's a hedge here along this and a hedge on both sides where that, to protect that opening.
I would be concerned for children's safety with just a hedge.
And we could add an additional fence on the top and still have it with a hedge that, so we wouldn't have to look at the fence.
Well, and it's also a liability issue, although would that fall to the city? Who would own that open space?
No, the open space will be owned and maintained by the developer.
Okay.
That was agreed upon as part of the master plan. And there may be a code requirement if you have that
Drop
drop
is
off
on- yeah.
at some point, so
Yeah.
we would certainly address that.
Okay, and I see how it works well to have the one roadway through the site. We did initially discuss how many units the property could sustain, and that includes proposals for what's called, closer to the library, is that Phase 4?
This is phase 3 here.
Phase 3. And I know early discussions, we were talking about townhomes, something that would be a buffer with the existing residential, as Commissioner Freeman pointed out, as opposed to a third three-story building. Given the unit sizes that you have, I'm not sure if the number of units is a good measure to use, but I would certainly want some feedback from the fire marshal to see how many units with that one access road, or square footage. I'm not sure what criteria he would be using, but you're going to have potentially 4 units, four buildings, including the condominium at the northwest corner, all opening up into this alley, people coming down into their parking areas, coming up. It's a pretty small area, and I would like some information from them.
We have been working with them throughout the master planning process, and they're continually reviewing, so they are aware of the layout, and certainly the life safety requirements in the buildings themselves. These are brand-new buildings, so they're fully sprinklered, fully alarmed, appropriate building materials. But yes, we will continue to have those discussions throughout the process.
And I am not one who's in favor of setting specific requirements at this time for phase 3, because you don't know what market you'll face with that building. But I would ask the committee to consider strong recommendations, given the large size units in 723, 727, these exceptionally large units in the proposed building, that strong recommendation be given for some 1- and 2-bedroom units for a variety of housing so close to our downtown, so that a variety of families and individuals can consider this alternative. And I have to say, last but not least, I see the Donovans in front of us, and I know that they've been very patient and asking. I did take a look at the site, and this Phase 3-4 land drains down towards their property now. It kind of drains down to Westminster. And I believe that Mr. Donovan had indicated he'd had some discussions with you and that had gone well. There's a lot of dust and debris, which is unavoidable in construction, and I think they understand that. You've tried to minimize some of that. But for this next phase, I think I would feel more comfortable if you would address at least some temporary situation on the drainage adjacent to their property. I noticed that to the east of their property line, they're below that property to the east, so it's a double burden for them. And I think they have been very patient.
I would agree, and we have a plan to, the engineering had looked at that, and as soon as the weather, we're able to, we're gonna address it with a swale that we can cut along that edge. We were hoping to do it actually this week, but it froze up again, so, but as soon as we can get that, we're doing it. And you know, we're, in our BRB meeting, it became apparent that we can do a better job in terms of anything that we can do to minimize the impact to their, you know, to their lifestyle, and that we absolutely will try to accommodate what we can do to make it the situation better, because we are building a building right next to their house. We understand that.
Thank you. And now we'll turn to public testimony, not to exceed 5 minutes per speaker. Any public testimony? Mr. Donovan, do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you're about to give or have previously given is true and correct to your best knowledge? Thank you.
Hello, hi. My name is Doug Donovan. I'm a long-term resident of Lake Forest and reside at 373 East Westminster, which I think we're clear is immediately east of the overall site plan. I trust, I think you received the emailing that I sent earlier this week when we learned about this meeting and the BRB meeting that occurred late last week. I'll try to be brief here. I won't read that email specifically, but I did make a few points here so I could try to stay on task and brief, but rather step back a little bit because the email was very tactical to the dynamics of daily living. So we're here today to try to collaboratively learn more about the plan and engage the proposed development to the project plan. Our last substantive communication on this project plan was when we asked for a meeting, we had a meeting with city staff and the developer in May of 2017. And there we did discuss our concerns about how the master plan had been arrived and how it would progress. At that time, we agreed that we'd be proactively communicate for steps going forward, that some of the elements couldn't be spoken about because the city was in discussion with the developer about purchase of what had been the historic lots and what today are kind of an open staging area. Today, I kind of have to state that we haven't really experienced that visibility that we walked out of those meetings thinking that we would have, with kind of a proactive and collaborative communication about what was happening around us and what we could expect. Like I said, we got this mailing on Monday, so I couldn't attend all the BRB. I did try to come in, but I didn't actually see the presentation, and I'm still really not clear on exactly what the presentation is from what's been available. To our knowledge, all the meetings that we have attended and tried to participate, I think they started in 2015. They were really substantive in 2016, and then activity commenced in early 2017. But all those, when they went from HPC to BRB to plan, and then I believe elements of the city council, they all seemed to talk about the concerns and the difficulties of what wasn't laid out, what would become of those, and how the master plan could be lost over time without a really definitive definition of what the expectations were at the time and how those decisions were arrived. Now, for this, we see what seems to be a significant change to the master plan as we understand it, but without what seems to be the deliberate considerations of what the master plan was expected to be and will be moving forward. So our concerns are essentially that the plans will continue to progress, evolve, adjust indefinitely without a pre-agreed expectation, or predefined and agreed expectation communicated. So to progress forward, we urge today's commission not to approve this plan without a forum to include the neighborhood in the planning process with regular opportunities to gain feedback and support, and better define each phase that will begin and end and what can be included, such as ways the neighbors will be identified, communicated, and impacted in manners like traffic, sewage, drainage, noise pollution, and those kinds of real-life impacts for daily life. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now we have the opportunity for final questions from the commissioners to the petitioner or staff, direction to the petitioner and staff, or any requests for additional information. I would be happy to provide my list, and if other commissioners have other concerns, I'd ask them, if they haven't expressed them already, to please express them now, and we could have some discussion among the commissioners. The public testimony period is now closed.
So I guess I'll jump in on this. And coming from, just stepping into this process, obviously it's been going on for a long while, but my first impression is that this is departing a little bit from the master plan. The building's bigger, the open space is smaller. It just seems like there's, and I'm just kind of generally talking around, it might be out of our purview, but I just want to kind of get my thoughts out here. It just seems there's way too much density that's planned for this area. And the first thing I think of is how negatively that is going to impact this neighborhood. I think we kind of missed a big opportunity here to develop this whole cultural corridor idea, where it's an idea where it's kind of a continuation of our public spaces that we had in Market Square. I don't want to see something that's just full of luxury residential apartments. I don't think that serves Lake Forest diversity of housing. I don't think it complements our really historic, beautiful church, library. I don't think it's sensitive to the homeowners. I would really like to see something more open space considered here in terms of not developing, the phase 4 and 3 or whatever that is, and just leaving it open. It also allows the library to have some more visibility from Westminster. It has potential to help them with their redevelopment. It lessens the impact on the neighbors. I'm kind of disappointed about the look of the building, because like Guy, when I look at it from Market Square, it really does dominate the church and the library, and it wasn't supposed to do that. I mean, if you go by the guidelines that were developed, it was supposed to be subordinate to those two historic buildings. It drastically changed the character of this neighborhood from something residential to something that looks more like a renovated warehouse type of building. It doesn't really address any kinds of I know there's 2 units that are affordable housing, but we're in danger of changing this whole McKinley Road area that could be good for affordable housing all the way up north to the high school, and we're starting to see all these luxury condos go up. And I don't know if that really serves our community the best way. So I'm more concerned about, having, from going where it's recommended on the master plan to 2-story building to 3-story with a 4th roof element. I mean, that just dominates against, when you look from Market Square and you look at that train station, all you see is this big brick building behind it now. I don't think that's what anyone intended. The building's bigger than what was proposed on this master plan, and I would like to see something that's more in keeping with that. And I just think about the affordability of these neighborhoods. We're so struggling to have affordable housing units around, our town to keep people living here, working here, using our businesses. We just really need to pay attention to more diversity of housing. And I think this is an area to have more affordable housing. I don't know if this really serves it. I know that, it does serve a certain segment of the population that's downsizing from some of the larger houses. But I think about that and the change of character in this area. I also like the idea that Mr. Donovan kind of presented about having, maybe a forum with the neighbors to see how that might impact them around. Because, I've learned over the years that not every neighbor knows there's a city meeting on something that might impact them negatively. And it might be worthwhile just to have a gathering, just to hash out issues that might, you don't know. You want to be welcomed in an area, but at this point, I'm just concerned that this is not fitting into the neighborhood, and it's not really following the master plan. It's just too dense, too big. And I know Peter does great work. I mean, Regent's Row would have been a great kind of idea, here in this area. So anyways, I kind of got off on a tangent, but I was a little disappointed by what we were looking at tonight. And I am glad that they could figure out the issue with the church, because that was really a big issue with the small house next door. But that was one of the original homes on this neighborhood. So you can see how drastically the character of this neighborhood has changed over the years. And not that you go back to the old Victorian homes, but this is really impacting our the character of our downtown, and I just was hoping that we could be a little bit more subtle, less dense, and more sensitive to our historic buildings around this area.
I just had a question for Kathy on that. Would the surrounding neighbors have been notified of this meeting?
Yes.
And I believe initially we only had 1 or 2 neighbors on Westminster who attended one meeting.
Yeah,
So
it's just an
there was-
idea. I mean, I like the idea of just getting the neighbors together to talk through and walk through this. I think Steve's seen that with, all the meetings on the west side, how neighbors come out when you just throw a bunch of blueprints on a table and say, give us your ideas, what do you think?
Well, and when the first building 723, 727 was proposed, we did look across Western Avenue to the height of the buildings, Walgreens and Market Square, did we not? Commissioner Berg?
We did, and most of the neighbors were from 333 Westminster.
And see, 333 is, a more, moderate, like subordinate building compared to, to that church, and it kind of blends into its landscape there a little bit better than this does. If you look at the roof lines, they're a little bit more subtle. They don't have a big patio on the top. Just a thought.
So were you at the original master planning meeting? Were you on the commission then?
Yes.
Yes.
You were.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the master plan here and the one we see tonight. And actually, if I see there's a big change, it's really not very big. I think the length of the building that we're looking at this evening is only lengthened by the width of this indented piece on the back of it, because I'm comparing it to the building above it. As far as infringing on that open space we had originally looked at, all the other things are lining up with it, so it really hasn't changed in that regard.
Well, if we have the dimensions.
I'm deliberating now, dear. Now, I understand we don't have dimensions, but they can't dimension everything in the world that I'm gonna be looking at, okay? Now, when we saw this, and my memory's coming back to me a little bit better, and I'm probably the biggest proponent of creating open spaces and fabric that people can walk through. In fact, I was involved in a plan for this very properties before the properties were sold to Altunian developers. So I've looked at the whole site and I've examined it. When we were speaking to the people from the library when they were here, I recall that there wasn't very much reception on their part to open space and how that might benefit the library and interact with it and be pedestrian friendly. If anything, if I remember anything, it sounded like they were a little bit on the ungrateful side, and they were interested in logistics and parking. And I may be wrong when I say that, but because I had looked at the site differently myself, I thought the library would have embraced it, but they were not interested, as my memory serves me. So the idea of the open space as an integral part between the public and the private didn't seem to be a big deal that night. It wasn't going over very well. The open space that we saw back in 2016 wasn't really a substantial open space to begin with, really.
Mm-hmm.
It never was going to have the great promise of bringing people in like Market Square does. So,
Right.
as far as I'm concerned, that opportunity never really did get developed. So to criticize the plan now, to say we moved away from it, we were never really there, okay? And I know you're concerned about sun lines and all. That's not the kind of space this was going to be. It was, if I remember, the big benefit of this is that we weren't going to put up 3 stories behind the library. And that, to me, was probably as much as we were going to get that night. Now, with regard to the change in the plan along McKinley, yes, there's been a property transfer arranged. The building is longer in the north-south direction. But I think that benefits the composition. I think the building that's there now will probably work better with another flanking element on it. So I don't see great deviation between these two plans to the point where we need to have a big forum and get the neighbors in. I mean, if you say that, you're almost like saying we didn't do a very good job the first time, and we've all changed our minds. And I don't know if we can do that. Those are my thoughts about the plan. So, there's another way to look at this, too. I mean, this is almost like the reverse of density. I mean, when you think about how big these units are, we're not introducing a lot of density to the downtown area. You're not adding a lot of parking demands. There's not going to be, 6, 7 units with maybe 3 people living in each one. There's going to be 1 unit. I mean, these are luxury. I'm not a wealthy person. I can't afford to live in one of these things. But what's interesting to me, and it may not be correct, but for the downtown of Lake Forest, which right now those properties there, and I worked in the 7-Eleven building. It's not a very nice office building. It's old. It was cozy. I loved it. But, in and along McKinley, some of the housing is a little less than housing in other parts of Lake Forest. And as an indicator for the potential of Lake Forest for residential in and around the city, I was pretty amazed, Peter, when I think I ran into Todd and he told me the kind of units you guys were having demand for. And I thought, it reminded me of something Dick Clark said, when you have the people that are close to poverty and people that are close to great wealth both like the same thing, you've really got some style there, it appeals to both. And for the downtown area here to go through a makeover and be attractive to that type of, social strata is a really good sign. That downtown Market Square, downtown Lake Forest is pretty attractive to people. And in the discussions I hear about how are we gonna bring people into Lake Forest and what are we gonna do, I think it's kind of neat that the people want to stay in Lake Forest, and if they have the money to come down here and live in relatively tight quarters, that they find it desirable. I think that there are probably more units up on Laurel that accommodate, smaller families or fewer square footage. So maybe that's the differential that allows both of these to exist. You know what I mean? We're not going to overflow. There aren't a lot of buildings like this in town. So, at any rate, I'm feeling more in favor of approving this. I really don't know that our criticisms tonight are spot on.
So since I was on the commission at the time, if you're finished.
I'm done, sure.
Since I was on it at the time, if I could join Commissioner Berg in this trip down memory lane. I tend to agree with your comments in general, and I want to start by saying, again, I appreciate the foresight that the city council had and the city had, and Kathy through her staff has led in trying to create a vision for this space. Those discussions were had when we approved the master plan. My reservation at the time, and I agree with you, Guy, that my reservation at the time was that the open space wasn't large enough. And if I recall your comments correctly, you were trying to envision a way that we could have a mirror image of the square on this side of the train tracks. So you were
listens to
certainly
me?
in support of a larger open space, but we were all having a difficult time envisioning it. And we have to take the property for the limitations that it has. My concern, Kathy, is that we've created a situation here where when we approved the master plan, my understanding of it was that we were approving something that largely approved footprints, not necessarily they were going to be identical, but the density and in a general sense, those footprints, that we weren't going to hold them to the footprint, but conceptually they were going to be the same. And I think, unfortunately, by not bringing this back to the Plan Commission and giving an opportunity for the neighbors to come back, we've kind of created a situation where there's a temptation to throw out the entire plan and start over. I'm not one of those people. I think the developer has invested a tremendous amount of money in this project, and we gave them an expectation as to what this site was going to look like, and we should abide by that. But I would want to avoid doing that again. So I feel like it would be better for us to have a more fulsome discussion about what do we do with phase 3. I think I thought it odd at the time that we were developing this a building at a time, whereas we normally would look at an entire project. And I understood why we did it that way at the time, because the city hadn't yet contracted with the developer, and we were encouraging the developer to work with the church. And kudos to the church as well for being a good neighbor here. Unlike other projects we've had, rather than choosing to come in here and give us a sermon about the evils of development, you came in and you spoke openly about your concerns, and then you worked with the developer and you put some property in play. And what a tremendous neighbor to do that. And I think the sight lines from the street view, with the absence of the house, and many of these frame houses were built back in the day, by the way, because they would haul lumber from the train station, right across the street and build a house. So, there's nothing historic about that, to my view. It was the way houses were built at the time. And the absence of that house and the mirroring of the front elevations of the buildings. And I imagine when 333 Westminster was built that there were a lot of upset neighbors too. Now it looks like it's a reasonably balanced density, but at the time it probably did not. And let's not forget what was here before this developer took possession of these buildings. These were really unattractive office buildings that, across from that beautiful train station now, really didn't serve our community at all. So I am fully in favor of the development. I think the sightlines from this view are beautiful. I think you've been very thoughtful about it, Peter, but I wanna take a pause, because I think if the city had come back to us when they had contracted with this, the same issues that I raised at the previous meeting about those parking spaces being land banked. And you're right, Guy, the library was more concerned about getting 8 parking spaces than they were about the corridor, and that troubled me too. I thought we should be thinking about this in a way that increased traffic patterns, and with the change in the elevations of these buildings, had they been brought to us at the time, I think we would have been discussing, how do we create a pedestrian pathway from the train station directly to the back of the library? How do we create that rear entrance to the library that you were talking about that opens onto a green area? And I remember you saying, you know, people could go out and read a book or have a lunch or whatever. I mean, and that's a corridor, and that's a sight line from the rotunda all the way down to the street to the north. I think we need to see the whole plan. I remember also, Peter, thinking of sightlines, that the sightline into the development from the train station, if you're standing out near the platform looking to the east, at one point you had talked about the idea that it could be a series of townhomes, and the way in which those townhomes were brought together could allow for an extension or a continuation of like the open space and have a nice fountain or something. I mean, you specifically mentioned the fountain, and then it would give this visual tie-in across the entire property. I think we need to see that. I mean, I don't take a position on this other than the fact that I think we already said it would be townhomes, and at the very north end, it was going to be a single family home or duplex, or if we were going to create this visual tie-in, it might be all townhomes, but at least we'd have this kind of visual connection. And those were all the things that I was thinking about when I saw this site and approved the density and the general footprint. I'm still committed. I don't think we change roadways. I don't think we get into any of that discussion. We had that discussion at the time. The open space is as it was, but we were encouraging a larger open space and a connection with the library. And I remember specifically encouraging the people from the library to get together with the city and the developer and figure this out, because you have the beautiful front lawn of the library, and there's a real opportunity here to make a true corridor. So I'm really mostly focused, Peter, on just that little section at the end, you know, and taking advantage of what you've done here on the western portion of the property. But I think we need to see what Phase 3 looks like so that we can have that feel for, can you make that fountain a reality? Can you tie a north-south view? If it's all townhomes and the density doesn't change much, that's fine. If the property to the far north, look, we've got a great example of a duplex that we approved on Scott, just up the way, where it's a duplex that faces the street and then faces the interior. I mean, you could do something like that. I mean, I'm not, you know, I don't think it dramatically changes the density in any event. So to my mind, if you could figure out a way to tie an east-west, north-south visual for the rotunda, for the train station, that to me would be more important than whether it's a duplex or a single family or a townhome, because the density will largely be the same, but the pedestrian connection to this area, to my view at least, would be vastly different and way more consistent with the task force's plans. One last comment on that. I do appreciate, again, the developer. I want to make sure we understand our charge here. I don't want to overly burden the developer. This is not, to me, a project that should be treated differently. My fear is it has been treated differently already, and we should work to rectify that, not compound that problem. So that's why I'm asking for the step back to make sure that we have a commitment going forward. I don't think my vision of a broader view of this, Kathy, is not that we throw out the plan and start over. It's what do we do within phase 3, as it's already been defined, and what do we do to get the library to work with the city and the developer to figure out this open space? That really is it for me. I think we have made a commitment to this developer to abide by the density and the rest of the plan. The 3-story buildings are absolutely consistent with what they said. They said no larger than 3 stories. So the master plan is largely, and the comments that we made are consistent with the task force vision. The problem is we didn't have the whole property before us at the time. And now that we do, I think it's worth looking at. I'm just troubled by the fencing that separates the library from the church parcel, from the new development to the library. It is not, it's not taking advantage of the opportunity that I thought we had here. And it's a shame because it really is a great example of a cooperative effort between the city to make use of city-owned property, to work with the developer and the neighbors. And so I do tend to agree with was it Donovan? That we should see the whole plan. I mean, we should stick to what we committed to, but we should have a better vision so that we're not back here in a year and a half with 3 new commissioners wondering, what did those other knuckleheads do?
I think the difficulty is we can certainly further detail phase 3, but at this point in the process, we don't know exactly what phase 3 will be. But we can certainly pull out the open space and identify that as a piece that needs to come back to the commission for discussion before a final development plan or a conceptual development plan is approved. I
So we
think
just simply don't have the authority because city council has approved it? Is that what we're saying? Because we certainly didn't do the city parcel over on Laurel that way. We did the staging and we did the, increased density towards the street, and we had the full view of it, and I think ended up with a beautiful project as a result. Why don't we have full visibility?
this was specifically talked about a phased project with the idea that there'd be an overall master plan, and I hear what you're saying, we can come back to you with an overall master plan, but will we, in the next month or two, know exactly what those buildings on the phase 3 part will look like, what unit types they'll be? I think we do want to pause a bit and see what happens with the Laurel and Western Avenue development. But do we have an excess of rental units in the community? Do we need smaller units? Do we need larger units? Certainly, as part of this, there will be some additional affordable units that will be required. So I think we can bring back to you a refined master plan. I just don't want to mislead you to think that we're going to have final details anytime soon. I think it took, probably 18 months for phase 2 to take shape. And keep in mind, a master plan is a high level. It's not meant to say your building has to be in exactly this footprint. The Laurel and Western Avenue project was a different type of project. You're correct.
So I'm just concerned though, like I said, because the footprint, I understood that there'd be some flexibility, but generally that was the view. And I actually think that this new building is consistent with that thinking. I do. My issue with it is by widening the building and improving the sightlines from the street side, you made that already small open space look smaller, and you didn't get the commitment from the library to make that a land bank at a minimum, preferably an open space. And so that, I think, is what's making it all kind of fall apart for me. And I'm not as concerned about the interior of the building because unlike the Chase Bank property and the development there, here, floors 1 and 2 provide us with a very clear idea of what a future separation of that unit would look like. I mean, we all we need to do is look at floors 1 and 2 and we can say, well, that's what you could do. You could subdivide it in exactly the same way they did there. I think I want to give the developer as much chance to succeed, and it sounds like they're succeeding quite well. Did you say 80% occupied in building 1 already? Is that? 100% so. So, I mean, fantastic. So there's clearly a demand, and that's a great thing. But gosh, I wish that the city and the library, the church came together, but that the city and the library would have been able to come to a better use of time
We
this
will certainly have
together.
that discussion, and as I said, the library's going through its own process, so that may be a piece, that open space, that parking, maybe the plan commission directs that area be finalized through an updated discussion of phase 3.
We had a walkway that led right to the train station parking lot. I mean, you know, it's not that much further from the entrance. I mean, I'm just trying to think about, does 8 spaces give the library enough reason for us to take take the potential of this corridor and limit it in such a dramatic way? I say no, but.
I hear you. There was a commitment to provide parking spaces to the library, but I hear you, and we can certainly have that discussion.
Excuse me, but I think I saw Commissioner Piketty's hand up a while ago.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. I'm at quite the disadvantage, I think, by not having been here when we went through this, when the commission went through this the first time. And I'm terribly confused still as to what our charges or even what our authorities are. I mean, we can chat all night about a cultural corridor and how we should have had that, but is that really something we can and should be discussing now? Do we even have authority to say, let's put a match to this because we're going to build a cultural corridor? So my thoughts have evolved throughout the evening that I'm personally going to support this with the caveats that in phases 3 and/or 4, we indeed have more cooperation, as Commissioner Freeman was requesting, to make sure that we don't get too far off plan. But unless somebody can clarify for me, I don't see how we can go back on any of this.
I like the second building with the additional land. It does present a better facade and better proportion and balance to building 1, which I think is a very nicely done building. I'm concerned because there was a lot of information not contained in the report that I think we could benefit from, make a better, fuller decision, and my suggestion would be to ask petitioner to provide that information and open this for discussion and finalization in the March meeting. And it will give everyone a time to review the new information and to give their thoughts on phase 3 and 4. I appreciate Commissioner Freeman's comments. Definitely, we were thinking more of a 2-story there. I would think we could make some strong recommendations, but not requirements. In terms of at this point in time, what would the commissioners like to see in phase 3 and 4?
I'll just say, and again, without the benefit of having been here for phase 1, but had the process gone differently and had, when the master plan was deviated from with the addition of the church property, had it come back here before going to the BRB, would that have been ideal? In my mind, yes. But the fact is, that's not the way it happened. And the BRB has approved building number 2, so.
Well, they approved the demolition and the landscaping plan. That's how I read it.
Oh, okay, I thought the building design had been approved.
Correct. The building design, exterior material, conceptual landscape plan, and overall site plan.
So given that,
That's not even what was included in the February 7th meeting agenda. This was for the design and exterior materials only.
The building
So
review
I
board
will,
completed its review of the building.
then I do have to also agree with Commissioner Douglas. That should have come to the Plan Commission first.
so I think, given what has happened, and we're here to to look at the final plat of re-subdivision and the overall site plan. I guess I'm in favor of approval unless there are elements of the site plan which have not been approved by the BRB, like namely, this open space and how that functions in relation to the library. That would, if that has not been set in stone by the BRB, then perhaps we revisit that, but everything else, I think, has been decided, and the simple plat approval is all we're left with, which I'm in favor of approving.
And the Plan Commission could certainly direct that the open space and parking of the library be reconsidered and be brought back for a conceptual discussion of the development parameters for Phase 3. We could do that at a sooner time rather than later to give the developer some direction. So that's certainly a recommendation that the Plan Commission could make, that piece be pulled out.
Clear, I don't think BRB's, that would be their purview. The open space and where the buildings are located, that's all part of the master plan, and that's this commission's territory, not BRB. So I think, based on the summary we saw, they unanimously approved Phase 2 building, and I would too. I think it's a great use. I think it's consistent with the master plan. It's just different because the property lines changed. So, and when the property lines changed, then the Plan Commission's review, which we conducted, I think was an opportunity for us to revisit and change. And I would have re-emphasized that this isn't a new thing I'm raising with you, Peter. We talked about it at the time, and I know Guy did as well, that we were concerned about the tie-in and whether it was consistent with the task force. So if that can be left for discussion and there's nothing that creates a guarantee for the library, and that's considered now all part of Phase 3, then I'm more comfortable with an interim approach here than pausing right now. But I just that's just a logistical comment.
We can certainly have that discussion. I don't want to commit that the library will give up the 8 spaces. We can certainly have that discussion and bring that area, in addition with the later phase property, back to you for a conceptual, high-level discussion to reform the parameters, rethink the parameters for that area.
And the only exception there, sorry, Monica, I know, the only exception there, Peter, would be that, that there could be some type of a pedestrian corridor to the south end of Building 2 that would encourage the use of the parking at the train station, but not yet disrupt the sight lines for the church and that, whatever you envisioned as it relates to the south end of that building. I think there's an opportunity there to provide parking for the library, public parking for the library, in a nearly adjacent way. So that.
Commissioner Ruggles?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's opportunity in Phase 3 to use the southernmost part of that lot and incorporate it into this Phase 2 so that we get more of that open space that we were all sort of looking for, and maybe help with the library parking and the connectivity. So I just think that would ease most of the board members' minds, and moving forward. Because as long as there's the possibility now that the northern part of Phase 3 is not a single-family residence, I just think that there's potential for a different scheme to the south. And if we could look at that, I think we would be doing the city, a great favor. There's nothing that disturbs me about the building itself. I think it looks great. It matches your other one. As a matter of fact, I do like the southern elevation of it and how it's forming a courtyard with the church, how you step that down. So I think that was a really nice piece of urban planning, and I think I would have just liked to have seen a little bit more of that happening on the eastern end of the site and how it connects to the library. And I'm confident you can do it. It's just something that we need to see both of those phases put together.
And I'm still left with a lot of unanswered questions. We're left with what looks like a much smaller open space. And I believe a few more weeks of thought and some input as requested by the petitioner would certainly make me comfortable with moving forward with it. I may be in the minority on this one, but I think we're setting a bad precedent to allow a building of this significance to be passed with such scant information. Not even to give the building square footage, the layout, the ingress egress. I mean, this size of the open space, which is clearly different from what we originally discussed, and whether there are any safety concerns with this slope down to the parking garage. I mean, frankly, boys run through hedges all the time, and they could run through a hedge and just go down 6 or 8 feet. And that does concern me. And if we don't address it at this meeting, before approval, when does it get addressed? We'll have no control.
Well, I do believe that's a code issue, but I think hearing the,
Kathy,
His
can I make
comments.
one more comment about this? It just occurred to me. Wasn't there a property line movement as part of our master plan approval of this? Wasn't the southern edge of the current property that has a building on it now, wasn't that moved south about 5, 6, 7, 8 feet or something like that? Was that part of it?
To the other office building
was some.
parcel.
Wasn't there some concession that, I mean, to make it balance better? I mean, I mean,
I think it was more to make the
723 and
roadway.
727
Right.
larger. I remember
the
Commissioner
roadway.
Ruggles' comments at the time.
I mean, so we've
But
been,
perhaps we should move on to the staff response. Do public testimony or commissioner comments.
I've heard a lot of concerns. I think we can address them. I sense discomfort. I would suggest that we do continue this, we bring you back. Some of the information, like the information about the detailed floor plans, that's not usually something we bring to the commission. We can certainly provide that information to you. We try and focus you on what your charge is. But we can also bring you back a process for looking further at the later phase, including the open space concern. We can bring you back a process. I'm not saying the answers, but we can bring this back to you next month with the information you've requested, Chairman Kerr, and a process for bringing this back to you sooner, so this commission can have some further discussion about how the open space is configured and about overall parameters for the later phases, such as expectations with respect to setbacks, knowing that the purpose of a master plan is not to put in place a specific master plan, it's to set parameters and allow creativity and allow change and set a direction. So I would suggest that given the discomfort that we hear, that you do continue it, and I think we have good direction on what you want to see next month and then soon after in the coming months.
So can I make a comment? I think we can cover Commissioner Karas as well in the interim. Her concern, that the recommendation as it existed today was subject to final approval by the city engineer. So maybe the city engineer and the developer can get together and work out that
That would
ramp
be
issue,
sufficient
right?
for me.
Yeah.
No.
But the other thing I think that's most important is getting some kind of connection between the library and the city and the developers to sit down and see whether there's a way that they can trade. I mean, we're talking about 8 parking spaces, and we're holding up what I think is a really great opportunity. So, I think
There is still a sidewalk shown on the plan.
there is, it's the north end of the building, and then the one that runs north-south from along the alleyway. And I hate to
Right.
call it an alleyway, because I really would like to think of it as a corridor, but right now, it looks like an alley. I mean, so that's
Well,
what
and that
worries me.
was the suggestion of the fire department, because at one point, Mr. Whitmer was suggesting it go all the way through the library. So some of that was constricted by the recommendations of the
Yeah.
fire department.
I'd like to, we've talked all the time about how our retail spaces in the downtown area need to be walkable, because you don't drive by our downtown area, you have to drive to it. So we should be figuring out ways, and that was the purpose of this task force, and I think it's still achievable within the plan as we've outlined it. I really do, and I think largely my vision of it was the one you shared with us. I mean, it wasn't something that I thought of. So I think the church has provided a real opportunity to make this a much more appealing project, to my view, than it was originally, even because the buildings were so different in size. And now you've really achieved something that I think is really, really nice. And I wish the library would be more open to what we're trying to do, which is connect it to the community.
And again, the library is going through its own process. We can bring you back a process where, I don't think we can resolve all these issues at your next meeting. What we can do is answer your questions that relate specifically to Phase 2, and we can bring you back a process for, and a timeline for when we will bring you back further, bring this back to you for further discussion, to create a larger open space, to provide more significant and attractive pedestrian connections, to establish some parameters for the future phases, knowing that it will be high level, but it will provide more direction to the developer.
Can I make one more comment so that we don't have the chicken coming home to roost at our next meeting? Before we send the petitioner off, and there's a kind of a quasi, we'd like more open space, maybe on the southern part of parcel 3. You know, I don't know how many times tonight, but this north-south road has been referred to as an alley. And if I was a designer and I had to create, I'm thinking, if I remember, even Peter had another building in the Phase 3 portion, and I think he even had an architectural feature on it terminating that road. You look down from and what I'm trying to say to you guys is that the only way to make that building on Phase 3 really work is to make it visually linked down this road between the two buildings that are going to be built, the two flanking buildings. That changes that alley, gives it a chance to be a street. Because if we put a public park there, and then you turn, and then you go down alley, I don't know if Todd and Peter are going to want to take a gamble on building a building in the middle of, even if that property line disappeared and you put a condominium building up there, I don't know if it's going to be easy to sell those units.
Yeah.
We might be making subclass, it's like, kind of like what they do in these other communities where they try to fool you, and then you find out there's a front to a building that's off of an alley. You know what I mean? I think, so this open space, we're talking about it, but I don't know if we're going to be able to see any really great shakes coming out of this. I mean, the ramp down in that building kind of really bifurcates what could almost be a big open space off the middle of the library. But gosh, you know, my hopes were dashed, the library just didn't seem to care. You know, it's kind of like, I don't know. At any rate,
Why do you say that, though? Why couldn't there be, and we did talk about an architectural feature on the building itself or a fountain or something like that, but the open space is to the west of that. So I wasn't
no,
talking about
I'm
moving the
thinking,
building.
I'm
was-
thinking that I sensed some thoughts that maybe this would be coalesced into open space.
No, well, that's.
Well, I thought I heard that from the other side of the
Okay.
of Barrister. So I just want to make sure that we're not sitting here thinking that he's going to do that. I mean, he needs a great deal of this frontage to sell this building as part of the downtown McKinley Road. It terminates his new street. It doesn't have a name yet. You know, that becomes a viable, living, breathing road.
Yeah, I mean, I defer to Peter on the visual connections, but I just remember that. And I think the sight lines, I just want to make sure that we're paying attention to all of the sight lines and not just the one from the street, McKinley. That's, and one that ties these features together in a better way.
Peter, do you have anything that you want to add? I mean, because, you know, this is valuable time. If someone's going to have to come back, I'd rather hear something tonight.
I mean, I would like to have I just have a couple questions, because you guys are pointing together on things, and I just want to understand what you're pointing at and how you're thinking about it.
I
So,
would just caution you about trying to design the site while sitting up there. I think you've given some direction. I think we just need time to think it through and talk to the library and.
I would agree. You know, I mean, I think that our Phase 2, in terms of the building footprint and all that, I would generally take away from this meeting. People are pretty comfortable with that. I think the open space, the outlot piece, how that comes in to, you know, Phase 3, what is that in that whole, when I say Phase 3, the whole east parcel, how does that get developed? How does that, you know, we're gonna have to be sensitive to Doug's concerns, to the residentials, you know, there's a lot going on in that. We also have to be sensitive what the marketplace is, what people really want to buy, what people, you know, I mean, we'll go bankrupt pretty easy or pretty quick if we build something like, you know, down the other corner that's still for sale 2 years later and hadn't sold. I can't do that. So, you know, I think that, but I do think all those things can be done, and they're all sort of a win-win-win. Because if we do, you know, I think you brought up a lot of good points about, you know, here we go. The visibility of this is that through this axis, through this, and have a terminus on a piece of building allows this to come through and benefits this building, and makes it more viable. I mean, one of the big advantages, there's a lot of advantages to working together on this, and, you know, this is a complicated process, you know, so, and we've been doing it for years. And so I think that, you know, by trading this parcel for basically an alley parcel, which was back, by creating this open space, it really makes this piece much better, because it has sight lines out of it as opposed to being enclosed. That's what we talked about. I mean, really, this open space did a bunch of things. It got parking to the library, and I agree with you 100%. This would be much better as all open space. And so, you know, if that weren't parking, I think everybody would be happier about that. I can't deny that. And then by, you know, creating this parcel, its relationship to there, it can see out diagonally. This building sees out diagonally. I mean, there's lots of good things for this space. It's not really like an open park. It's really visible space from not only the public and private. You know, whether the pedestrian, you know, I would argue the 2 streets down here, you know, whether we can get a better connection this way or that, I think that's actually doable, whatever. You know, what happens with this parcel impacts obviously this property quite a bit, impacts what's going on here. And, you know, so I think that is open. But I do think that the development of this with this probably makes sense to do those two together. You know, and we pull it back here because that's where the existing property line is, for that. So, you know, I mean, I think that what you all are debating or discussing has real merit, and I hear you and I understand it. And we can't give you answers on what we think is saleable in that future. I mean, you know, small units, big units, whatever. I mean, the only thing I would say and comment is that we've been successful because we've looked at what people want, and we feel pretty good about retaining some residents, current residents here who want to stay in Lake Forest. And we have one large condominium in Lake Forest. It's going to be here. So that's a pretty good thing in the CBD to get people here. I mean, we're all about bringing more people, keeping more people, making sure people go out to dinner, do all the services, pay taxes, real estate taxes, all those things. This all does that. And you know, I think it strengthens our CBD so that we can support other things in this area. So, you know, I'm super excited about what we're doing, and I think we just can't, you know, whether it's a mix of small or big, I don't know. I mean, we're actually selling these things. We still have ones to sell. It's not an easy task in this marketplace, you know, to sell things. So I think, you know, there has to be some understanding from you know, we invest millions of dollars in buying these properties, and we looked for the master plan to guide us to say, yeah, we should negotiate with the church to you know, it was a great partnership. Economically, we were able to do it because we were able to feel confident that we could sell it, that we could buy that. There's a real value to that. So, you know, and I think the trade with the city and do that. There has to be some economics to the thing too that we need to work out. I think we're all there, and we're pretty close to making this thing really a great development. We're long term. You know, I'm physically going to be moving in this place. I want to live there so much. I think it says something to this. And so, you know, I'm excited about it. The process, while you guys seek it's fast, we think it's super slow, just in terms of it. But I think you know, if we could move this forward, if we could approve the phase 2 building, very open to what happens on to the next phases, and set the the guidelines for how that will move forward, we're super comfortable with in doing. So I appreciate everybody's time on this, because we do feel it's going to be monumental in terms of the overall fabric of Lake Forest. Thank you.
Kathy, any other comments? Well, I would just suggest you do have a demolition approval. The next Plan Commission meeting is within 4 weeks. And I would still make a strong recommendation to receive the additional information on Phase 2 and also have some guidelines on Phase 3 in a discussion, as several of the commissioners have asked.
So it sounds like we really have a choice between two motions. One is to adjourn, and the other one is to approve the plat, subject to the engineering review to allay the concern regarding the ramp.
Can't we just
No.
continue?
We can adjourn and continue, right, that's it, but then there's a second, I heard some support for, but.
It's not just that comment, Commissioner Freeman. I have a list of approximately 20 questions. And they're factual questions. Some have been answered, many have not. Many could be answered by next week. But I'm concerned about offering approval. And then the next person who comes in, who may not be as well known in Lake Forest, comes in with a 2-page summary of what they want to do. And are we supposed to approve that because this is what we've approved for someone we know so well and trust? I mean, I have concerns about that. And I don't need to express them again.
So, are you looking for a motion?
Yes.
I move we continue the petition to allow the petitioner to address all our concerns, answer your questions, and bring it back as soon as he thinks he's able to.
Do I hear a second?
A second.
All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 All those opposed?
Nay.
The motion passes with 1 nay and all others voting aye. Now we move on to other items. Is there an opportunity? This is an opportunity for the public to address the Plan Commission on matters not on the agenda. Are there any proposals? Seeing none, we would move on to any additional information from staff. That having been said, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.